Economic activity continues to grow. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee and let's have a look at this latest media release from the Australian Bureau of Statistics about our economic growth. Now, GDP has grown. Now, you need to also think about it from a per capita basis. Over time, we've been growing, but on a per capita basis, the growth has been, well, going down. So we're still growing. We're still doing better, but just not quite as good as in periods of the past. Now, we had our first recession in, 30 years pretty much, guys. That baby right here. We didn't miss the double dip recession, and we seem to be continuing to trend up. So we'll have to see if the interest rate increases have a significant enough impact on the discretionary spending of Australia to see if, we might be hitting a recession overall. Some industries will feel it. It's going to be different across the country depending on where you are and what subsectors you're even in, and even what parts of the country you're in. So the GDP is kind of useless in many regards. I think in some ways it's more political and a feel-good. But anyway, let's have a look. So Australian gross domestic product, GDP, rose 0.9% in seasonally adjusted chain volume terms in the June quarter and was up 3.6% through the year, according to figures released by the ABS. Shane Crick, head of national accounts at the ABS, said rises in household spending and exports drove growth in the June quarter. This is the third consecutive quarter of economic growth, following a contraction in the September quarter of 2021, which was impacted by the Delta outbreak. Wow, that really feels so long ago now, doesn't it? So retro. Oh, boy. Household spending drove growth. Household spending rose 2.2% for the quarter, contributing 1.1 percentage points to GDP. Growth was driven by spending on travel-related categories such as transport services, up 37.3%, hotels, cafes, and restaurants, up 8.8%, while spending on food fell 1.2%. So we're seeing, the people who are going on holidays who can afford to, who don't need to worry about their mortgages, or who are just after paying it, still continuing to spend money. And then others are starting to cut back on excessive luxuries. Maybe I'm reading way too much into it. Households increased spending on domestic and international travel as COVID restrictions further eased and international borders remained open. While spending on transport grew strongly, households were still only spending 2/3 of what they did pre-pandemic. He said, so we're still tightening the purse strings. We're still holding back. I think it's going to be a bit of a delay. It'll take a lot longer than people may realize until they, start to dust off the old wallet and spend a bit more. I mean, have your spending habits returned to pre-pandemic levels? Or are you still battening down the hatches, anticipating, tougher economic times? We've loosened our wallet a little bit. There's a few subscriptions have crept back in. I know the kids, because we reward our children for their schoolwork, they earn like 10 cents per activity they do. And at the end of every term, they can spend that. And this term, the kids all pulled their money together and bought a subscription, a yearly one for Disney+. So I guess we're getting subscriptions again. But, that's the kids spending their hard-earned pocket money. But so, yeah, we've even crept up our little spending again. Increased travel activity by both households and businesses was reflected in the increased gross value added for the accommodation and food services, transportation, postal, and warehousing industry. Well, accommodation and food have copped it so hard for the last few years. They really took a beating with all these lockdowns, all these interventions, all these restrictions. So I'm hoping it comes back to normal for many of these businesses. So household savings to income ratio fell for a third consecutive quarter from 11.1% to 8.7%, as the increase in household spending outpaced growth in household income. Households were continuing to save, but at a declining rate over the past 3 quarters. While the 8.7% household saving ratio was the lowest since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, it remains above pre-pandemic levels. strength in comparison of employees, up 2.4%, drove a 1% increase in household gross disposable income. This is consistent with growth in employment in the labour force Australia. The number of employed persons rose 0.9% over the quarter, driven by growth in full-time employment, up 2.3%. So this is good news. More people are getting employed. This is what we want. This is what we want. So wet weather and material and labour constraints curbed dwelling and investment. Total dwelling investment fell 2.9% as wet weather across much of the East Coast and continued material and labour shortages hampered construction activity. This detracted 0.1 percentage points from GDP. Exports rose at the strongest rate since September 2000. Net trade contributed 1.0 percentage points to GDP, driven by exports, which rose 5.5%, which was partially offset by imports increasing 0.7%. Experts recorded the strongest quarterly rise since the Sydney Olympics, boosted travel exports in September quarter of 2000. Mr. Crick said goods exports rose 4.2%, with the main contributors being mineral ores, other mineral fuels, and rural goods. Services exports rose 13.7%, driven by travel and transportation services as international borders were open for the full quarter. So the rise in commodity prices led to high mining profits. The terms of trade rose 4.6%, with export and import prices up strongly for a second quarter in a row. Ongoing supply chain issues and global uncertainties continue to drive demand for Australia's mineral and rural commodities. High commodity prices coupled with increased export volumes drove a 16.9% increase in mining operating surplus in June to $83 billion. So, well, let's have a talk about this little one here, guys. So, well, GDP is ticking on. Now, the question is, will these interest rate increases that have just started being felt? It's going to take some time for them to flow through to the wider economy. And it'll take even longer for the people who've locked their mortgages down at lower rates to be impacted by it at all themselves. So how long will it take before spending cools off enough to impact the demand-driven inflation coming from us here in Australia to manifest in GDP? You tell me, guys. It could be months. So, I mean, this is good. This is good news, good signs. You know, we're slowly still growing. It's not going too crazy. But so long as tourism, natural resources keep kicking on, then, well, hopefully it'll all work out. Just one to watch. One to watch. What do you reckon? Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Check out my other channels, HeiseBim, HeiseSays International, for other content I discuss. And if you're a fan and want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can. Financially on YouTube or Patreon, using our referral links on Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or AussieBroadband, buying our pocket squares, or calling us if you need an architect. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. And keep watching the economy. She'll be right, guys. I mean, this is a good news story, so it'll get no views. I noticed how the media played up the negative aspect, like construction took a hit.